So I was scrolling online the other day and came across this post that really just stopped me in my tracks. It was from someone, seemed like a normal person, celebrating their decision to cut off a lifelong friend, like completely. And the reason, get this, a heated argument over some political headline they saw. The way it was written, though, it had this really strange mix of like pain, but also this righteous fire, framing the whole thing not as a loss, which, I mean, cutting off a lifelong friend is a loss, right? But framing it as this brave, necessary act of self-care. But what was truly fascinating, maybe a bit disturbing, was the comment section. It was just this torrent, this absolute flood of applause. Hundreds of strangers praising this person's courage, calling them a warrior, saying they were setting healthy boundaries. It felt almost like a public ritual, a collective celebration of disconnection. Like severing a real, tangible human bond over an abstract disagreement wasn't a tragedy at all. No, it was a triumph of personal virtue. And sitting there just watching the likes and all these validating comments pile up, I just felt this deep sense of unease. It wasn't even about who was right or wrong in the politics of it. That wasn't the point. It was about the source of that fierce, almost celebratory energy. This need people seem to have, not just to disagree, but to transform that disagreement into a core part of their identity, to wear their moral certainty like a badge of honor almost. It felt less like real strength and more like this kind of desperate performance for an invisible online crowd. And it just left me with this question that I couldn't shake. Why are so many of us surrounded by more comfort and arguably more connection tools than ever before in history? Why are we so eager, it seems, to find meaning in the act of pushing people away? That feeling of unease you get when you see something like that public celebration of disconnection. It isn't just some fleeting online trend, is it? It feels like it points to something much, much deeper, something that might explain why we're seeing this kind of behavior, not just tolerated, but actually rewarded in our society. It feels like a symptom, rather than the actual root cause.
You're absolutely right. That feeling isn't just you. What we're witnessing here isn't simply individual preference or, someone having a bad day. It's actually an escalating public health crisis, a crisis of chronic loneliness and social isolation. And it's particularly stark, particularly evident in affluent Western societies. And look, this isn't just about feeling a bit down sometimes or enjoying a quiet Friday night in. That's totally normal. This is a profound systemic challenge. It has tangible, quite severe impacts that reach far, far beyond just individual comfort levels.
Okay, so it's not just a personal feeling like being bummed out. It's something with measurable, widespread consequences. So how does this loneliness actually manifest? What does it look like for, individual people? And then how does that scale up to society as a whole?
Well, on an individual level, chronic loneliness, it doesn't just contribute to feelings of anxiety and depression, though it certainly does that. It significantly affects mental well-being, partly because it activates our body's stress response system, the fight or flight system. And prolonged activation of that system, day in, day out, can lead to heightened states of emotional distress, cognitive impairment, things like trouble focusing, memory issues, and even measurable changes in brain structure over time. And the research consistently shows very real negative effects on physical health outcomes, too. We're not just talking feelings here.
Physical health, like what?
Yeah, physical. We're talking about increased risks of heart disease, chronic inflammation throughout the body, weakened immune systems, and even premature mortality, dying earlier than you otherwise would. Some studies actually compare the health risks of chronic loneliness to the risks associated with smoking something like 15 cigarettes a day, or with obesity. It's this kind of silent epidemic that truly impacts our physical vitality, our basic ability to stay healthy.
Wow. Okay, so it's literally making us sicker, undermining our ability to thrive. That's huge. And you're saying this isn't just contained within individuals, it actually spills out and impacts the broader society. How does that work?
Precisely. It doesn't stay contained. Beyond the individual, chronic loneliness deeply erodes something absolutely fundamental: civic trust and social capital. Think about it. When people feel disconnected from others, when they feel isolated, they become less likely to trust their neighbors. They're less likely to trust local community institutions, maybe schools or libraries or even governmental bodies. And this lack of trust, it translates directly into reduced participation in democratic processes, lower civic engagement overall, and just a general withdrawal from collective problem solving. People pull back.
So it weakens the very glue that holds communities together.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it. If we connect this to the bigger picture, many of our most pressing economic, cultural, and social problems, Things like a faltering democracy, increased political polarization, a decline in collective action on big issues like climate change. Many of these might have a fundamental lack of social connection at their root. When people don't feel part of something larger than themselves, when they don't share a sense of common purpose or community, well, the very foundations of a functioning, cohesive society begin to crack. It really is like a building where the mortar between the bricks is slowly, silently crumbling away.
That's a really powerful analogy. It makes me think back to that online post I mentioned.
Yeah.
The celebration of cutting ties. If people are feeling so profoundly disconnected, what's actually causing this chasm? What's driving it? Is it just a matter of individual choices adding up, or are there larger, maybe almost invisible forces at play? Forces that are maybe designing our lives in ways that actively push us apart?
Oh, it's definitely not just individual choice, although choices play a role, of course. Our lives seem to have been subtly, but significantly, redesigned in ways that actively disconnect us. It's almost baked into the system now.
Yeah.
And this stems from several systemic factors, not just one single cause. It's a confluence of things. Firstly, you have technological advances, which is ironic, right? Because while they offer these incredible tools for connection, like we saw with that online post where hundreds chimed in, they've somehow also contributed to this pervasive disconnection. We can dig deeper into that paradox later, but it's clear that more digital links don't always translate into deeper, more meaningful human bonds.
Right. More connections doesn't equal better connection.
Exactly. Secondly, there's been a really noticeable and frankly concerning decline in participation in traditional civic groups. Think about, the classic examples: bowling leagues, community associations, local volunteer organizations, even participation in religious institutions. These once served as really crucial hubs for incidental social interaction, for community building, for just bumping into people who weren't exactly like you. And the data from sources like the American Enterprise Institute or the General Social Survey shows significant drops in membership across various types of these associations, really since the mid-20th century. People are just, less likely to join or regularly show up for these kinds of groups anymore.
And the global pandemic, maybe temporary in its strictest sense, certainly didn't help this trend, did it? It felt like it forced a kind of social re-engineering on us almost overnight.
Not at all. In fact, it seems to have solidified and even accelerated many of these disconnecting habits. We've adopted new norms since the pandemic. Think about the dramatic increase in remote work, which, sure, offers flexibility, but it drastically reduces those incidental daily interactions, right? Those spontaneous chats by the water cooler, grabbing lunch together, those quick greetings in the hallway that actually build camaraderie and a sense of belonging in a workplace. Gone for many. We're seeing more online dating where profiles are heavily curated and interactions can sometimes feel, transactional rather than organic. Online shopping has replaced the chance encounter with a neighbor at the grocery store or that friendly chat with a local shop owner. And broadly, participation in once common community activities, from local clubs to informal neighborhood gatherings, seems to have seen a further decline. These shifts, they seem small individually, but they accumulate. They add up to create profound social distance, leaving many feeling isolated even when they're surrounded by people, stuck in their own homes and digital bubbles.
It really does sound like we've lost the physical places that naturally bring us together. Those informal, sort of unprogrammed spaces where connections just happen.
Organically.
Without an agenda.
Yeah.
Is that part of this architecture of disconnection? The literal decay or absence of our shared physical world?
You've absolutely hit on something crucial there. A major challenge is the scarcity of high-quality, inviting public places. Places where people can actually connect in person. We've unfortunately deprioritized investment in our shared civic spaces for, at least a generation now. We started viewing them as luxuries, as amenities, rather than as essential infrastructure for a healthy society. And this neglect has left us with inadequate parks, maybe rundown trails, underfunded libraries, neglected community centers. There's often a substantial backlog of basic maintenance for the ones we do have, making them less appealing, sometimes less safe.
So even if this space exists on paper, it's not somewhere you'd actually want to hang out.
Often, yes. And it should be easy. It should be compelling to connect in person. To run into someone you know at a vibrant local market, or strike up a conversation while sitting on a comfortable public bench watching the world go by, or even just to observe the rich tapestry of human life around you, which is itself a form of connection. But often the physical spaces just aren't there, Or if they are, they aren't well maintained, they don't feel safe, or they lack the programming or features that encourage diverse groups of people to gather and interact. It feels like we've literally paved over or neglected into disrepair the very places where community used to spontaneously bloom.
That raises such an important question. Historically, haven't public spaces always been absolutely vital? For community, sure, but even for the functioning of democracy itself. It feels like this isn't some new revelation, but maybe something we've collectively forgotten in our, pursuit of private comfort and digital convenience.
Oh, this is a truth as old as civilization itself. It's fundamental. Thousands of years ago, for instance, you look at the public marketplace in ancient Greece, the famous agora. It was intrinsically linked to the very concept of democracy. It wasn't just a place to buy olives and pottery. It was where citizens gathered, where they debated philosophical ideas, discussed politics, hammered out policy, and actively participated in civic life. It was truly the beating heart of their society, the physical space where democracy happened.
And that wasn't just an ancient Greek thing.
Not at all. Centuries later, you look at the framers of the U.S. Constitution, they clearly understood this profound link between public space and public life. That's precisely why they enshrined the rights of free speech and public assembly right there in the First Amendment. They knew intuitively and from history that for a vibrant democracy to thrive, people needed accessible, shared physical spaces, places to gather, to express themselves freely, to argue, to persuade, to engage with one another face to face. Now, while some scholars today suggest this fundamental relationship has maybe eroded in the digital age.
Right, like maybe Twitter is the new agora.
Well, that's the debate. Others compellingly argue for the emergence of what they call public space democracy. Even now, they point to global phenomena, things like the Arab Spring uprisings or the Occupy Wall Street movement. These moments vividly demonstrated the emancipatory power of public space being rediscovered personally and collectively. It suggests this isn't just about voting every few years, it's about the ongoing idea that genuine civic engagement, the collective shaping of our future, often still requires physical presence and shared experience in those vital common grounds. The digital space complements, but doesn't fully replace, the physical.
That's a really powerful point. It begs the question, though. Are there real-world examples where communities are actively pushing back against this tide of disconnection, where they're actually rebuilding that connection through physical spaces? It's easy to talk about the problem, but where are people doing something about it? Maybe creating entirely new kinds of agora for our time.
Oh, absolutely. There's some fantastic, truly inspiring examples out there. One that really stands out is the Rail Park in Philadelphia. This project took a long-abandoned, decaying, elevated railroad viaduct, basically. Industrial ruins cutting through neighborhoods and repurposed it. They transformed it into this vibrant, elevated public park, a green space where there was none. Phase 1, which opened in 2018, is actually quite modest in size, just over half an acre, less than a quarter-mile long. But it became an immediate, unique, and really authentic gathering place in neighborhoods where previously no such inviting public space existed. It attracted over 5,000 visitors in its first few weeks alone.
Wow. So people were hungry for it.
Absolutely starved for it. And the truly amazing thing about it is how it immediately started fostering diverse social connections and building trust. It brought together people who might never otherwise have interacted in their daily lives. Unlike some parks that might primarily serve a specific local demographic, the rail park design intentionally welcomes people from both within and outside the immediate neighborhood. It actively tries to expand the potential for these new serendipitous interactions. And it's not just a one-off success story either. The planning for Phase 2 has already launched, and they're doing extensive community outreach to shape its design, which demonstrates this profound communal desire for such spaces and a shared understanding that truly good public spaces aren't just dropped from above, they're co-created with the very people who will use them.
Okay, so the path forward here isn't just about pouring concrete and planting trees. It's about building these spaces thoughtfully. With a deep understanding of human needs for connection and a clear purpose behind it, it's about creating spaces that actually beckon people to connect, rather than just, existing passively.
Exactly. That's the core insight. The need isn't just to create places, but to ensure they are high quality, that they feel safe, that they're immaculately maintained, and that they're amply programmed with activities and features that welcome everyone across all demographics, all backgrounds. This really underscores a fundamental principle that civic urbanists and social scientists emphasize. There is, essentially, no civic life without civic space. So, investing in these communal assets, from well-lit, clean parks with comfortable seating to vibrant community centers offering diverse programs, is absolutely crucial. It's essential for building resilient, prosperous, and truly connected communities. It's about creating environments where people genuinely want to be, where they feel safe and comfortable, and where they can truly interact, not just passively coexist next to each other.
This all makes me wonder, though, if our social fabric is, let's say, unraveling, and even our physical spaces are often pushing us apart rather than pulling us together, what's driving this disconnection at an even deeper level? Could it be something more fundamental, something deeply embedded in maybe our economic mindset? A system that perhaps completely inadvertently fosters this very hyper-individualism, this constant feeling of not enough?
That's a crucial question, and frankly, a deeply uncomfortable one for many. It takes us right to the systemic role of consumer capitalism, and specifically, its inherent, relentless drive for what's often called perpetual economic growth, or PEG. This doctrine, which is deeply rooted in neoliberal economic theory, doesn't just suggest growth is good, it essentially demands an unfettered, unending expansion of an economy's productive capacity. The primary goal, the main metric, becomes constantly boosting gross domestic product, or GDP, almost as an article of faith. And this pursuit continues, often explicitly, even at the risk of breaching planetary boundaries, ecological limits, and, as we're discussing, perhaps pushing beyond human, social, and psychological limits too. It's this relentless, almost manic pursuit of more that's woven into the very fabric of our modern economic system.
Okay, so we're collectively driven by this idea of constant, ever-increasing growth. More is always better. But does more growth truly equal more happiness, more well-being? Or is there a point, maybe a threshold of diminishing returns, where all that more actually starts to deliver less of what we truly crave? Connection, meaning, contentment.
There's compelling and really growing evidence for exactly that, what researchers call a law of diminishing returns to happiness. This research, which spans decades and looks across many different cultures, consistently suggests something quite profound. Once basic human needs are adequately met, and that's crucial, things like reliable access to food, decent clothing, safe shelter, quality healthcare, education, clean water, once those basics are covered, the overall quality of life, people's reported happiness and satisfaction, becomes far more dependent on things like social capital, on the strength of our community bonds, our relationships, and on an individual's general sense of purpose in life. It becomes much less dependent on simply accumulating additional material wealth.
So getting richer doesn't necessarily make you happier past a certain point.
Exactly. Think about it intuitively. Once you have enough to be comfortable, truly enough to feel secure, does acquiring a much bigger house or a flashier car reliably make you happier in the long run? Often the pursuit of those things can lead to more stress, more debt, maybe working longer hours, which means less time for meaningful relationships or activities. So this strongly suggests that the purely materialistic doctrine of perpetual economic growth does not, in fact, reliably enhance genuine happiness or well-being in life beyond a certain threshold. It can become a chase that, for many in affluent societies, never quite delivers the promised fulfillment, leaving us feeling kind of empty even as our material possessions pile up.
Okay, if more stuff doesn't guarantee more happiness, and might even be counterproductive after a point, why then is GDP, gross domestic product, still the primary yardstick? The absolute gold standard we use for measuring societal well-being and national success. It seems like we're measuring the wrong things, or at the very least, using a deeply incomplete scorecard for what really matters.
You've hit on one of the most fundamental flaws, arguably, of our current system. GDP is inherently, profoundly a problematic metric for human well-being. At its core, it's merely an aggregate estimate of monetary transactions. It's just a tally of money changing hands in the formal economy. And the critical, almost absurd flaw is that it makes absolutely no distinction whatsoever between transactions that actually enhance well-being and those that actively diminish it, or simply repair damage. For example, expenditures resulting from crime, like rebuilding after a riot, or increasing prison costs. These activities boost GDP. They're counted the same as truly productive investments in things like high-quality housing, public education, or preventative healthcare.
Wait, so cleaning up an oil spill increases GDP?
Absolutely. A catastrophic oil spill that necessitates billions in cleanup efforts actually increases GDP figures, even as it devastates an ecosystem and countless livelihoods. Building more prisons increases GDP. Treating diseases caused by pollution increases GDP. This is a huge, profound blind spot. And crucially, the vital, non-tradable services provided by healthy ecosystems, things we all depend on, like clean air, clean water, a stable climate, fertile soil, biodiversity, these are entirely unaccounted for in the GDP system. They have no market price, so they don't count. This means our primary measure of societal success completely misses the very things that are most essential for life and genuine human well-being, including, as we've discussed, strong social connections and healthy relationships. It really is like trying to assess the health of a forest by only counting the number of chainsaws operating within it.
That is a truly unsettling thought. Wow. What's even more fascinating, or maybe alarming, here's how some discussions, some lines of thinking actually suggest that this relentless, almost unchecked pursuit of economic growth can be compared to something almost pathological, something that's actively undermining us from within, like a destructive force.
Indeed. It's a provocative and deeply unsettling perspective, but one grounded in systems thinking. One prominent line of thought suggests that the socio-metabolic pattern of societies, meaning the way a society consumes and processes energy and materials, much like an organism's metabolism, that this pattern, especially since the agricultural revolution and accelerated wildly since the industrial revolution, eerily mirrors the pattern of cancer. The argument posits that formerly highly cooperative agents within the system, you could think of individuals, communities, even corporations, analogous to healthy cells working in harmony within a body camper. They gradually become more individualistic, more competitive, and intensely focused on surplus accumulation purely for themselves. This behavior then leads to runaway growth, an overshoot of the system's carrying capacity in this case, the natural limits of our planet, and eventually, potentially, a self-inflicted collapse. It's a chilling comparison, almost dystopian, isn't it? Implying that our entire economic engine, the very thing we celebrate as progress, could be inadvertently designed towards its own self-destruction, like a runaway growth within the planet's living body.
And this isn't just a philosophical idea or some kind of poetic analogy, is it? You're saying it's rooted in fundamental scientific laws, the very rules that govern the universe.
Precisely. This analogy resonates deeply with core ecological principles and, even more fundamentally, with the laws of physics, specifically thermodynamics. An economy, no matter how complex or technologically advanced it becomes, always operates as an open subsystem within the biosphere. And the biosphere itself is finite, it's non-growing in material terms, and it's materially closed, essentially. Nothing material comes in or goes out, except for the constant inflow of solar energy. Now here's the kicker, and this is where it gets truly interesting and non-negotiable. The second law of thermodynamics. Famously known as the entropy law, it dictates that during any real-world process, including every economic process, low entropy, which is useful, organized energy and materials, is irrevocably degraded into high entropy, which is waste, pollution, and dissipated unusable heat. Think about it simply. Every time we make something, every time we use energy or materials, we're also creating waste and disorder somewhere down the line.
You can't unburn the coal.
Exactly. You can't unburn the coal to get the energy back. You can't unmine the ore. You can't unpollute the river easily. That fundamental, irreversible arrow of time, that constant increase in entropy or disorder in the universe, means the very idea of endless material growth on a finite planet isn't just challenging, it's physically impossible in the long run. We're always running down the available stock of useful energy and finite resources. So this relentless transformation of valuable matter and energy into waste inevitably diminishes the biosphere's productive capacity, its regenerative capacity, and its absorptive capacity for our waste. It pushes us ever deeper into what ecologists call ecological overshoot, where our human activities, our total demands on the planet exceed Earth's natural carrying capacity. Its ability to regenerate and absorb, it's like a very hungry organism consuming its own habitat much faster than that habitat can possibly regenerate.
Okay, so if constant, endless material growth is fundamentally problematic, maybe even physically impossible in the long run, and our primary metrics like GDP are deeply flawed, how does this economic system manage to perpetuate itself and its associated issues? Especially if it seems to rely on such unrealistic ideals, how does it keep running despite these inherent contradictions?
That's a great question. The dominant neoliberal doctrine of perpetual economic growth relies heavily on a theoretical construct, a sort of idealized model known as the perfectly competitive market structure. This ideal market, which sounds wonderfully efficient and self-regulating on paper, operates under a set of highly unrealistic assumptions. Foundational assumptions. These include things like complete market knowledge, the idea that every buyer and seller knows everything about every product and every price, everywhere, instantly. It assumes perfectly rational economic agents, meaning we all make decisions based solely on maximizing our own utility, with perfect logic and foresight, never swayed by emotion or advertising. And crucially, it assumes the complete absence of what economists call externalities, those costs or benefits incurred by a third party who wasn't directly involved in the original transaction. In the real world, as you can imagine, these assumptions rarely, if ever, hold true. And this leads to widespread systemic market failures.
Okay, can you give us some tangible examples of these market failures? How do they actually manifest in our daily lives and maybe help perpetuate this problematic growth-focused system?
Certainly. Let's look at a few key ones. First, you have the pervasive issue of monopolies and oligopolies. Market concentration. These aren't the small independent businesses envisioned in the perfect competition model. These are large, powerful corporations. And rather than fostering robust competition, they often collude, either explicitly or sometimes just implicitly, to erect barriers to entry for potential newcomers. This allows them to reap what economists call supernormal profits earnings. They go far beyond what's needed to simply cover costs and stay in business. They control markets, they can stifle innovation that doesn't suit them, and they often dictate terms rather than simply responding to market signals. Secondly, and this is critical to our discussion, there are those adverse environmental externalities, which we touched on with the flaws in GDP. Economic activities very, very often have profound negative impacts on others, on communities, on ecosystems, on future generations that are simply not reflected in the market price of the goods or services being produced. Take that example of a chemical factory polluting a waterway again. The social costs of that pollution, the long-term health impacts on communities downstream, the damaged livelihoods for fishermen, the public cost of cleaning the water, the loss of biodiversity, these costs are typically externalized. This means they are borne by society, by taxpayers, by the environment, by you and me, rather than being captured by the market prices of the factory's products or paid for directly by the polluting industry itself. This so-called freely competitive market simply doesn't account for them. It literally externalizes the dirty work and its consequences onto the public, making the product appear artificially cheaper than its true total cost.
Right. So the true cost isn't reflected in the price tag we see at the store, and we end up paying for it one way or another through our health, our environment, our taxes later on. What else contributes to these market failures?
Then there's the challenge of public goods. The market mechanism, relying on prices and exclusion, inherently fails to allocate public goods effectively. This is because their benefits are typically non-rival, meaning one person's use doesn't diminish another's, and non-excludable, meaning you can't easily prevent someone from benefiting even if they don't pay. Think about things like climate change mitigation, clean air, national security, basic scientific research, or robust public infrastructure like roads or the internet backbone. You can't really put a price tag on a unit of clean air and sell it efficiently, nor can you easily exclude someone from breathing it if their neighbor paid for pollution controls. The market just isn't designed to manage or provide these essential collective assets efficiently or equitably.
And there was one more you mentioned.
Yes, transaction costs. This is often overlooked, but it's fundamental. All economic interactions, even seemingly simple ones like buying a coffee, involve costs beyond the sticker price. Costs for researching options, for bargaining or negotiating terms, for monitoring agreements to make sure everyone holds up their end, and for enforcing contracts if they don't. Without effective institutional arrangements, meaning well-defined property rights, clear laws, impartial courts, and robust governance structures to lower these costs, transaction costs can become prohibitive. They can make beneficial exchanges too difficult or expensive to undertake, meaning potential improvements in human well-being, potential collective solutions remain an elusive dream. So it's a system built on a theoretical, frictionless perfection that simply doesn't exist in the messy real world, leading to these deep, often unaddressed social and environmental costs piling up.
This brings us back to that question of individualism. There's a big debate, isn't there, about whether this hyper-individualism we're seeing, this tendency towards competition, maybe even that celebration of cutting ties that felt so prevalent in that online post I saw, is that a natural human trait, something innate that we just have? Or is it something that our particular economic system actually cultivates, maybe even requires almost as a necessary byproduct for its own functioning?
It's a truly fascinating and absolutely crucial debate. There are strong arguments on both sides. While some argue that humanity has a natural inclination towards individualism, maybe rooted in self-preservation, and that capitalism simply reflects and perhaps enables that inherent drive, others contend quite forcefully that the ideal capitalist subject, the kind of person the system implicitly encourages, is one who works as much as possible and consumes as much as possible. And this relentless pursuit, almost by definition, can profoundly increase feelings of alienation and actively degrade social trust. Because it subtly, or sometimes not so subtly, frames every other person primarily as a competitor, vying for limited resources, competing for jobs, for status, for attention, even for social standing based on consumption.
So individualism becomes less about being unique and more about acquiring things.
That's a key part of the argument. This perspective suggests that modern individualism often becomes less about true, authentic selfhood, developing your unique character and values, and more synonymous with consumerism. It fosters what you might call brand cults. Think about the fierce, almost tribal loyalty some people have to a specific phone brand or a car brand or a clothing label. It encourages loyalty to manufactured ideals, to lifestyles presented in advertising, rather than nurturing genuine, independent thought or deep, authentic relationships. Your identity becomes tied to what you buy and display, not necessarily who you are or who you genuinely connect with. Some critics even argue, quite provocatively, that unrestrained capitalism effectively puts a cash value on our moral commitments, where business interests in the pursuit of capital accumulation can prioritize their own needs and profits, even when there are potentially grievous impacts on society, on the environment, or on fundamental human relationships. It's a system that, if unchecked, can certainly incentivize a me-first approach, which could naturally lead to a greater willingness to push others away, especially when those connections seem inconvenient or don't offer immediate, tangible benefits.
Wow. Okay, so we've journeyed through how our social fabric might be unraveling, how our economic systems seem to inadvertently push us towards disconnection and this relentless pursuit of more. But what about the very tools that were supposedly designed to connect us? Our smartphones, our tablets, social media platforms. Are they part of the problem here? Or part of the solution? Or both, in this paradox of disconnection? Are they literally changing our brains?
That's precisely where the science of neuroplasticity comes into play, and it's absolutely fascinating and maybe a little scary. Neuroplasticity is the brain's incredible lifelong ability to reorganize itself. It does this by forming new neural connections and strengthening or weakening existing ones, all in response to our experiences, our thoughts, our actions. And our daily, often constant interaction with digital technologies profoundly influences this neuroplasticity. It's actually reshaping the very structure and function of our brains in observable, measurable ways. It's not just about what we use these devices for, like checking email or watching videos. It's how the act of using them, the patterns they encourage, is changing who we are at a fundamental biological level.
But hang on, it's not all doom and gloom, though, surely. There must be some upsides to this constant digital interaction. I mean, our brains are adapting. That's what neuroplasticity is, right? And sometimes that adaptation can be incredibly beneficial. We're not just losing something. We must be gaining new capabilities, too, aren't we?
Oh, absolutely. That's a crucial point. The brain's remarkable adaptability definitely offers some truly significant benefits from digital engagement. We shouldn't overlook those. For instance, research suggests that regular, skilled users of digital technology can exhibit enhanced multitasking skills. They might be better at managing multiple streams of information or conversations simultaneously, often with remarkable fluidity. This enhancement likely stems from the brain constantly navigating these diverse and dynamic digital environments that demand rapid attention shifts, quick decision-making, and the flexible application of various cognitive strategies. It's like a specific kind of mental workout for certain neural pathways.
So better jugglers, in a way.
In some ways, yes. Furthermore, the sheer unprecedented access to digital information and learning platforms provides an incredible source of cognitive stimulation and educational enrichment. Think about it. From vast digital libraries and archives to interactive online courses and tutorials on almost anything, these resources are capable of inducing positive structural and functional brain changes over long periods. They can genuinely foster lifelong learning, stimulate creativity, importantly, democratize access to knowledge in ways that were unimaginable just a few decades ago. We're seeing incredible global collaborations on complex scientific problems facilitated entirely by digital tools. We see the rise of online support groups connecting individuals with rare diseases who might otherwise feel utterly alone. So in many ways, our brains are indeed becoming incredibly adept at digital navigation, information processing, and certain kinds of connection, opening up genuinely new avenues for discovery and community.
That's quite compelling, actually. It's easy to forget those benefits. But then, of course, there's the other side of the coin. The darker side, perhaps. What are the downsides? The cognitive costs we really need to be acutely aware of when our brains are constantly, relentlessly bombarded by digital stimuli. Are we sacrificing something important, something fundamental for these new digital skills? Maybe our capacity for deeper thought or genuine presence or authentic connection?
Unfortunately, yes. The pervasive, always-on, often overwhelming nature of modern technology brings significant documented negative consequences, particularly concerning our ability to pay attention, our capacity for memory, and ultimately, as you hinted, our social emotional well-being. Let's try to break those down because the impacts are quite far-reaching and interconnected. Okay, first, attention. This is probably the most widely discussed impact. We're observing a dramatic, measurable increase in what's been termed distraction time among heavy digital media users. The very nature of digital content consumption, typically rapid-fire, non-linear, jumping between different things. Think endlessly scrolling through a newsfeed, clicking hyperlinks, switching between multiple tabs or apps. This fosters what neuroscientists call a browsing habit or a scanning mentality, and this fundamentally undermines our capacity for sustained, long-term attention and deep, focused concentration. You might find yourself struggling increasingly to read a long article all the way through, or immerse yourself fully in a book for an hour, or sustain concentration on a single, complex work task without feeling that constant, nagging urge to switch to check something else.
Yeah, that feeling is definitely familiar. And what about the direct interruptions from our phones specifically? It feels like they're designed to constantly vie for our attention, even when we're actively trying to focus on something else.
They absolutely are, and the research clearly demonstrates just how powerfully they interfere. Smartphones can acutely disrupt ongoing tasks through two primary forms of interruption. First, there are what we call endogenous interruptions. These occur when your own thoughts spontaneously drift toward your smartphone or online activity. You weren't notified, but you just think about checking it. This often happens when your current task isn't particularly rewarding or immediately engaging, and you're driven by this unconscious, almost conditioned desire for a more immediate hit of gratification, novelty, or social connection. This internal pull, this craving for a quick digital fix, can then lead to what researchers call a chain of subsequent task-unrelated acts on your phone. You check one app, then another, then you get lost down a rabbit hole. And studies show this can delay your return to and completion of your primary task by up to a staggering 400%. And interestingly, the richer the information encountered during that interruption, say a vivid visual image or a compelling short video versus just plain text, the more detrimental and lasting the distraction tends to be. It hooks your attention more deeply.
400% delay. Wow. Okay, so that's when we initiate the distraction. What about when the phone initiates it? The pings and buzzes.
Right, those are exogenous interruptions. These are the external cues, a notification sound, a vibration, a flashing light on the screen. And studies have conclusively shown that simply hearing the sound or feeling the vibration of an alert is enough to significantly decrease your performance on a concurrent attention-based task. This happens even if you don't actually look at or interact with the notification. Why? Because it prompts task-irrelevant thoughts. Your brain immediately shifts resources, even subconsciously, to process the potential new information, pulling your focus away from what you were doing.
So just the potential of a notification, the mere sound or buzz, is enough to derail our focus, even if we consciously try to ignore it. That feels insidious.
It truly is, and it gets even more subtle. There's also strong evidence for what's called the mere presence effect. This research shows that even the simple physical presence of your own cell phone just sitting there visibly on your desk or in your bag nearby, even if it's turned off or on silent, can diminish your available cognitive capacity and significantly worsen your task performance, particularly for cognitively demanding tasks that require deep focus. One well-known study found participants performed significantly worse on difficult cognitive tasks when their cell phone was visibly present on their desk compared to when a simple notebook was there instead. So this isn't just an anecdotal feeling people have, it's a measurable cognitive cost. It seems our brains are subconsciously allocating precious attentional resources to monitoring that potential source of distraction and connection, even if we consciously try to ignore its presence.
And this obviously has real-world, even life-threatening consequences beyond just struggling to finish reading a book or complete a work report, doesn't it? It directly impacts our safety in critical situations.
Absolutely. The starkest example, sadly, is distracted driving. Texting while driving, for instance, has been shown to impact nearly every crucial measure of dangerous driving. It leads to dramatically decreased attention to the road environment, significantly slower reaction times to hazards, and tragically, a much higher probability of crashes. And it's incredibly troubling that surveys consistently show alarmingly high percentages, like 31% of adults, and maybe even higher, like 42% of teen drivers in some US studies admitting to texting while driving. It really highlights just how powerful this compulsive draw to our devices is, that we're willing to take such risks even when personal safety and the lives of others are demonstrably at stake. We are quite literally sacrificing focus, attention, and potentially lives for a quick digital interaction. Another important aspect of this attention problem is the rise of media multitasking, or MMT. That's a simultaneous use of multiple forms of media, often facilitated by a smartphone, like texting while watching TV or scrolling social media while listening to a lecture. The research here has produced some mixed findings, making it complex, but the overall concerns are significant. Many studies link frequent media multitasking to a reduced ability to filter out environmental distractions even when you're trying to focus on one thing. Also, higher switch costs, meaning it takes longer and requires more mental effort to shift your attention efficiently between different tasks. Some research has even found correlations between high levels of MMT and reduced gray matter density in a key brain region called the anterior cingulate cortex, which is crucial for attentional control and executive function. Now, while a few other studies suggest potential benefits, like maybe better multisensory integration, the prevailing scientific concern remains the negative impact of chronic MMT on our ability to sustain focus, engage in deep work, and resist the constant fragmentation of our attention.
Okay, let's pivot slightly to memory. If our attention is constantly being pulled in different directions, if it's fragmented by these digital demands and interruptions, how does that impact our fundamental ability to remember things, to learn things deeply and recall them accurately later?
That's the next logical step, isn't it? This unrelenting bombarding of information, coupled with that fragmented attention span we just discussed, leaves very little cognitive bandwidth, very little mental space for proper memory encoding and consolidation. This fosters a dangerous reliance on short-term working memory and, increasingly, on external aids, our devices, rather than building robust, internalized long-term storage. This is where we see phenomena like the Google effect, or what some neuroscientists are now starting to call digital amnesia. Research clearly shows that the mere expectation of having future access to information, for example, knowing you can easily search for it online later, or that it's saved somewhere on your computer or in the cloud, makes us significantly less inclined to put in the cognitive effort required to properly encode and store that information in our own long-term memory. We tend to remember where the information can be found, the pathway, the search terms, rather than the details of the information itself. It's like our brains are effectively outsourcing the function of memory to external digital storage, and in doing so becoming less practiced and perhaps less capable of internalizing, integrating, and recalling details independently.
That makes a frightening amount of intuitive sense. So we remember the path to the information, but not the information itself. What about other forms of memory, like our memory for personal experiences, or even how we navigate the physical world?
Digital photography is another fascinating example of this outsourcing phenomenon. While taking digital photos might seem like a wonderful way to preserve memories, studies suggest it can actually diminish your memory for the observed objects and events themselves. For instance, if you snap a quick picture of an artwork in a museum, research indicates you might recall fewer specific details about that artwork later compared to if you had simply observed it intently for the same amount of time without photographing it. Now, this effect can apparently be mitigated somewhat if you actively zoom in on specific features while taking the photo, because that forces a deeper, more intentional level of engagement. But broadly speaking, while your visual memory for the photo itself might improve, your auditory memory for photographed events, the sounds, the conversations happening around you, the overall atmosphere, can actually be impaired. And this is particularly relevant, maybe, with the rise of ephemeral photo sharing apps like Snapchat or Instagram Stories, where the photos often disappear and aren't even saved for later review. In those cases, the momentary act of capture might be all you get, with no opportunity for that later memory jogging aid. And then there's the impact on spatial navigation. The constant, almost ubiquitous reliance on GPS navigation systems, which are deeply integrated into our smartphones, is strongly believed to interfere with our natural human tendency to develop cognitive spatial representations. You know, our internal mental maps of our surroundings. Remember the days of trying to navigate a new city using a paper map, or just by paying attention to landmarks and street names? You were actively building a mental picture, engaging your hippocampus, the brain region crucial for spatial memory. GPS does all that complex cognitive work for us, which, while incredibly convenient, seems to lead to impairments in our intrinsic spatial memory skills over time. We become less adept at finding our way without the digital crutch. Furthermore, going back to media multitasking, frequent MMT has also been consistently linked in studies to poor working memory performance and potentially diminished long-term memory functioning across the board. It seems to disrupt the consolidation process.
Okay, so it sounds like our devices are effectively training our brains to be incredibly good at certain things, like short-term, superficial engagement, rapid information retrieval, maybe multitasking in bursts, but perhaps at the significant expense of deeper cognitive processes like sustained attention, long-term memory formation, and maybe even spatial awareness. And what about that other thing you mentioned earlier, a desire for instant gratification? Is there a neurobiological link there too, driven by the constant stimulation from our phones?
Absolutely. Smartphones and the digital ecosystem they connect us to are deeply implicated in what feels like a profound cultural shift towards a necessity for immediate gratification, almost a compulsion for instant reward, instant feedback, instant novelty. Research looking into why we use media often shows that while our stated cognitive motivations, like explicitly seeking specific information or trying to learn something, are often not fully satisfied by our scrolling or browsing, users frequently gain significant emotional gratification, a quick mood boost, a feeling of connection, a moment of entertainment that they weren't necessarily consciously seeking. This suggests we're often driven by an unconscious, almost primal desire for that quick emotional hit or rush of novelty, validation from a like, or just simple distraction from boredom or discomfort. And studies also demonstrate a clear correlation. Individuals who are heavier users of mobile technology are consistently more prone to accepting smaller, immediate rewards over larger, delayed ones. This is a classic psychological measure known as delay discounting. They prefer $10 now over $20 next week. This correlation is often mediated by underlying traits like impulsivity, suggesting the brain becomes less adept at resisting those instant urges when constantly exposed to rapid rewards. And critically, experimental studies have even shown a potential causal link here. One fascinating study took smartphone-naive individuals, people who hadn't owned one before, and found that after just 3 months of regular smartphone exposure, they became demonstrably more immediacy-oriented in standardized delay discounting measures. This powerfully suggests that the consistent, rapid delivery of instant rewards by our devices can actually rewire our brain's reward pathways to crave and demand that immediacy even more. Neuroimaging studies further support this by showing that actions like receiving many likes on social media or even just sharing information about oneself online intensely activate the brain's core reward circuitry, the dopamine pathways associated with pleasure, motivation, and addiction. This powerfully reinforces these behaviors, making us want to seek them out again and again.
So we're literally getting a little dopamine hit every time someone likes our post or every time we see a notification pop up. And that then trains our brain to seek out those rapid, external, often superficial rewards, rather than maybe pursuing more meaningful, internal, delayed ones. Okay, so how does all of this fragmented attention, the altered memory, the constant craving for instant gratification, how does it ultimately impact our social and emotional well-being? This feels like where the paradox of disconnection truly comes into painful, sharp focus.
Exactly. Despite their explicit promise of connection and their ability to maintain certain kinds of links, the overuse of social media and other digital communication tools, ironically, tends to weaken genuine, nuanced face-to-face social skills. And paradoxically, it can significantly increase feelings of loneliness, social comparison, and high anxiety in many users. This is often linked to the superficial, often highly curated nature of many online interactions. We're constantly comparing our messy real lives to everyone else's carefully constructed highlight reels. This constant comparative behavior can easily lead to feelings of inadequacy, envy, FOMO, fear of missing out, and ultimately isolation rather than fostering true belonging or deep connection. These effects strongly indicate what neuroscientists call maladaptive changes in neuroplasticity. Our brains adapt to the digital environment, yes, but sometimes in a way that reduces our full, rich, nuanced engagement with the real physical world and the complex, subtle cues of in-person human interaction. We might become less practiced and perhaps less comfortable with the vulnerability and ambiguity inherent in authentic social engagement offline.
And are there indirect impacts as well? Maybe on something as fundamental as our sleep or our baseline stress levels, things that then further compound these social and emotional issues.
Absolutely. The impacts cascade outwards. Smartphone use, particularly late at night, is directly and strongly linked to pervasive sleep disturbances across all age groups. This is partly due to the physiological effects of the bright blue light emitted by screens, which is known to disrupt the production of melatonin, the hormone that regulates our natural sleep-wake cycles. It essentially tells our brain it's still daytime. But it's also due to the psychological arousal that comes from constant social interactions, checking news updates, engaging in stimulating games, games, or even just anticipating notifications right before trying to sleep. And poor sleep, as we know from decades of research, dramatically impacts cognitive performance the next day, exacerbates mood disorders like anxiety and depression, and can directly lead to or worsen depressive symptoms over time. It's a classic vicious cycle that depletes our mental and emotional reserves. What's really striking is that some studies suggest over 70% of Americans keep and charge their smartphones right at their bedside, almost guaranteeing this kind of sleep disruption. And then there's the very real anxiety of separation. The strong psychological attachment many people feel to their smartphones, feeling like it's an extension of themselves, can manifest in phenomena like phantom limb syndrome for the phone, or more commonly, phantom vibration syndrome, perceiving a phone vibration or ring when there actually wasn't one. Studies have also shown that people's subjective anxiety levels significantly increase over time when they are experimentally separated from their phones, for example, if they have to leave it in another room or if the battery runs out. And this separation anxiety isn't just a feeling, it can severely impair cognitive performance on tasks, even something as seemingly simple as completing a word search puzzle. It's as if a part of our extended cognitive and social self has been temporarily removed, and our brains react with genuine distress, creating this constant low-level hum of anxiety or unease whenever our primary connection device isn't immediately accessible.
Wow. Okay, what a deep dive this has been. Exploring these really intricate, interconnected ways that our drive for connection, or sometimes disconnection, our economic systems, and even the very tools we use every minute are shaping us, shaping our brains, shaping our society. We started with that really unsettling feeling I had about seeing disconnection celebrated online, and now we've seen how chronic loneliness, our relentless economic drivers, and even our digital tools might actually be pushing us further apart despite appearances. It truly is quite the complex, tangled tapestry of challenges we're facing.
Indeed. The core tension running through all of this seems abundantly clear. Humanity's intrinsic, deeply wired, evolutionary need for genuine connection, for community, for deeper purpose and meaning. This is being profoundly challenged by powerful, pervasive systemic forces in modern life. The individual act of pushing people away, like in that post you saw, becomes less an isolated personal decision and more, perhaps, a profound symptom. A symptom of a much larger, interwoven set of challenges impacting our very well-being, the health of our societies, and maybe even our long-term future on this planet.
So this really isn't just about individual choices adding up. It's about how our society is structured, how we measure success, maybe what we value, and even how our brains are physically adapting to this new, highly stimulating reality. Can you just quickly recap those overarching challenges, bringing these different threads tightly together for us?
Certainly. Let's try to synthesize. First, the overarching societal challenge is a significant, and by many measures, accelerating erosion of social capital and civic trust. We've discussed how genuine human well-being ultimately depends far more on strong, authentic social connections and a sense of shared purpose than it does on a relentless, purely material pursuit of wealth beyond a certain point. When that social fabric frays, when those connections weaken, so does our collective resilience, our individual resilience, leaving us more vulnerable to societal shocks and less capable of effectively acting together to solve complex problems. Secondly, there's that deeply ingrained economic disconnect. Our dominant economic model, driven by the ideal of perpetual economic growth, often measured solely by GDP, frequently externalizes critical social and ecological costs. As we've discussed, this means the public present and future generations, and the environment itself often bears the burden of environmental degradation, rising social inequality, and fractured communities that the market system itself doesn't adequately account for in its pricing or decision-making. This system frequently prioritizes short-term economic gains and shareholder value over long-term societal well-being and ecological health, leading to that kind of socio-metabolic imbalance where we consume and waste far more than the Earth can sustainably provide or safely absorb. It's like an economic engine that runs too hot, constantly generating waste and undermining its own long-term foundation. And thirdly, we have the profound impact of the ongoing digital transformation. The very digital tools we use, while promising universal connectivity and offering undeniable benefits, are ironically also fostering a form of shallower, more fragile, perhaps more performative connectivity for many. And as we detailed, they are literally rewiring our brains at a fundamental neurobiological level. They cultivate attention patterns that undermine deep focus and sustained thought. They alter how we encode and retrieve memories, making us more reliant on external aids. And they breed a constant, insatiable demand for instant gratification, potentially reducing our capacity for patience, delayed reward, and authentic, nuanced engagement with the real physical world and the complex, sometimes messy beauty of in-person human interaction. Our brains are becoming brilliantly optimized for the fast-paced screen environment, but sometimes it seems at the expense of cognitive depth and genuine presence.
Okay. Given these profound systemic interwoven challenges, what are some potential insights for a way forward? How do we even begin to weave these threads back together and consciously try to build a more connected, more sustainable, more truly human future? It feels like an absolutely enormous task.
It is an enormous task, no doubt about it, but there are clear pathways, clear principles emerging from research and practice. One key insight, brought sharply into focus by inspiring examples like the Philadelphia Rail Park, is the profound, non-negotiable importance of investing deeply and consistently in high-quality, accessible, welcoming public places. Remember, these aren't just amenities or nice-to-haves. They are the literal physical architecture for fostering genuine human connection, for rebuilding social trust from the ground up, and for revitalizing civic life. We need sustained public investment, thoughtful human-centered design, and robust programming to create spaces where diverse communities can gather, interact serendipitously, build bonds, and feel a true sense of shared ownership and belonging.
And alongside rebuilding the physical spaces, it sounds like we also need a fundamental, almost revolutionary shift in how we even define progress itself, moving beyond simply counting dollars and transactions.
Exactly. That's perhaps the most fundamental shift required. We need to critically reevaluate our societal metrics of success. What does a truly thriving society look like? Genuine human well-being must encompass far more than just monetary income or GDP growth. It has to include things like robust social connections, equitable access to quality natural environments, population health and longevity, educational attainment, and the capacity for individuals and communities to cope resiliently with inevitable challenges. This absolutely means moving beyond GDP as the sole dominant measure of progress, recognizing its deep inherent blind spots and limitations regarding what truly matters for human flourishing. We need a more holistic, multidimensional scorecard for what it truly means for a society to thrive, one that explicitly values connection, equity, planetary health, and genuine human flourishing over mere material accumulation and throughput.
Okay, and thinking about technology, the very thing that's actively reshaping our brains, how do we engage with it more mindfully? In a way that actually serves us better, that aligns more closely with our deeper needs for connection, focus, and well-being, rather than constantly undermining them.
This is a critical piece involving both individual responsibility and systemic change. Individually, we all have a significant role to play through cultivating what we might call digital hygiene, digital wellness, or perhaps digital literacy in a deeper sense. Simple, conscious practices can make a big difference. Things like scheduling regular digital detoxes, intentionally stepping away from our devices for meaningful periods, setting clear, firm boundaries for phone use, especially around sleep and focused work, turning off non-essential notifications to reclaim our attention, creating tech-free zones or times within our homes, like during meals, and consciously dedicating more time to offline activities and face-to-face interactions. But critically, this can't just be on the individual. Technology developers, the companies designing these powerful tools, also bear a profound ethical responsibility. They need to shift from designing primarily for maximum engagement and attention capture, time on device, towards designing brain-friendly or human-centric tools. Tools that actively encourage deeper cognitive engagement, foster sustained focus, promote well-being, and perhaps even facilitate meaningful real-world interaction, rather than designing primarily for constant distraction, compulsive usage loops, and the relentless chase for instant gratification and data extraction. This could involve building in features that reward sustained attention, promote mental health breaks, or even subtly encourage offline meetups, rather than simply maximizing screen time at all costs. And zooming out even further, the broader framework of genuine sustainable development, or GSD, offers a comprehensive, integrated vision for how societies might pursue improved human well-being, but doing so inclusively, justly, and crucially, staying within the planet's finite ecological limits. This means consciously choosing, as a society, to live within the frontiers of the biosphere, respecting Earth's carrying capacity and its non-negotiable biophysical boundaries. It's about prioritizing the active fostering of social capital and community resilience. Establishing effective governance structures that align economic activity with ecological integrity and social equity, rather than blindly pursuing what is, in fundamental scientific terms, an oxymoronic, a contradictory notion of perpetual material growth on a finite planet. It requires a complete paradigm shift from prioritizing short-term, narrowly defined gain to prioritizing long-term, broadly defined flourishing for both humanity and the rest of the living world.
Ultimately, then, if you had to distill it down, what is the core principle The fundamental understanding that ties all of this together, the loneliness crisis, the problematic economic system, the double-edged sword of the digital world, and these multifaceted paths forward you've outlined.
Ultimately, what's revealed, I think, with stark and sometimes uncomfortable clarity, is the profound ecological and social principle of holism. Or simply put, everything is intricately interconnected. Our individual well-being, our mental health, our physical health, our sense of purpose is intrinsically, inseparably linked to the health and vitality of our communities, to the structure and underlying values of our economy, and ultimately, to the delicate balance and health of the planet itself, our only home. When relationships within this incredibly complex, nested system change, for better or for worse, whether it's the severing of a personal friendship over an online dispute, the relentless societal pursuit of endless material growth, or the subtle cumulative rewiring of our brains by our digital tools, the entire whole is inevitably transformed. We simply cannot solve these deep problems effectively in isolation by looking at just one piece. We have to start seeing and acting upon the entire interconnected system and work towards finding a more harmonious, sustainable, and genuinely connected equilibrium.
What a truly deep dive that was, exploring the intricate, often hidden ways our modern drive for connection and sometimes disconnection, our prevailing economic systems, and even the very tools we hold in our hands are shaping us, shaping our experiences, shaping our future. It's become abundantly clear that these aren't isolated issues at all, are they? They're deeply interwoven threads that, together, define so much of the human condition in modern society.
Indeed. The research, the data, the emerging science really does suggest that our modern life, with its unprecedented levels of hyperstimulation, its powerful emphasis on certain types of material growth and individual achievement, and its unique, pervasive digital landscape presents profound systemic challenges to our intrinsic, evolved human needs. Our needs for genuine connection, for community, for belonging, and for deeper, more authentic purpose. Understanding these complex, intersecting dynamics, as we've tried to unpack today, feels like the essential first step. The first step towards recognizing the full picture of our shared human condition in this rapidly, radically evolving world. And perhaps, just perhaps, the first step towards consciously shaping a more connected, more sustainable, and ultimately more fulfilling future.
Absolutely. It really is a fascinating, incredibly complex reality we're all navigating together, where the very forces that promise comfort, convenience, and connection also seem to demand a certain vigilance, a certain intentionality, a certain conscious effort from us. If we truly want to thrive, not just survive. Perhaps, thinking back to that initial post, the greatest acts of courage in our increasingly disconnected world aren't really about celebrating the severing of ties, but about deliberately, patiently, and persistently forging them anew, both with each other and with the world around us.